You can find my review of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, The Baker Street Irregulars, right here on our YouTube channel, where I waxed lyrical about just how fantastic this game is and how much I admire its polish, presentation, and detective game perfection. But to give you a truncated version and to focus on the main point, The Baker Street Irregulars is probably the best written tabletop game I've ever played. It bounces effortlessly between poignant prose and sharp wit, between a lovable and memorable cast of characters on a fabulous romp through London, and the foreboding nature of the dark, dangerous Victorian streets that those characters inhabit. I care more about Wiggins and his ragtag group of friends and contacts more than I've ever cared about the characters in any tabletop game before this. Like, genuinely that much. For those who don't know, Consulting Detective is a series of boxes, each containing 10 cases to crack, set in the world of Sherlock Holmes, in which you are the investigators. And up until this box was released, it was written by pretty much the same team each time. It must have been rather daunting then when Dave Neal, the mastermind behind all the cases in this box, took on that legacy. But my goodness did he deliver, to the point where I now struggle to play the other boxes in the series because they just don't quite live up to their successor. The case design is almost flawless, with genuine twists and turns that can blow your line of questioning wide open, written in a way that rewards you for both following your gut and being overly prudent. There's an overhanging story that leads you through all the cases in order and culminates in an epic conclusion that would easily stand on its own as a fantastic escape room game in a box type thing. But in the case of this, it's only the 10th of the cases on offer, and there's so much more in there. On top of all the things that make this box unique from its contemporaries, you also get the pedigree of the Consulting Detective series itself, with its excellent presentation, its high quality tactile components, and a lovely gallery of Dickensian illustrations littered throughout the books, showing off the key characters and locations on your journey. This box had me laughing and crying in equal measure, and with the exception of maybe one of the cases, I had an incredible time throughout the entire box, always feeling satisfied with the final conclusion, whether I'd worked it out properly or not. The Baker Street Irregulars isn't just my game of the year, it's probably one of the best detective games ever printed, and absolutely demands your attention if you haven't nabbed it already. The decision really is elementary.
Honestly, I'm as surprised as you are that Pandemic Legacy Season 0 is good. Not just good actually, great, astoundingly great. A fantastic finale to an already brilliant trilogy, and my favourite game of 2020. Now, you'd be forgiven for being a little bit wary of a pandemic game this year of all years. While Season 0 was designed by Matt Leacock and Rob Davio as the conclusion to their planned trilogy several years ago, the timing of its release, even with a delay, meant that a board game about a disease with a global catastrophic impact was among the last things that people wanted to play. It's also the prequel in the Pandemic Legacy series and the umpteenth quel in the Pandemic series at large, which has gone beyond its viral namesake to feature the spread of cosmic horrors in Reign of Cthulhu, floods in Rising Tide, and even barbarian hordes in the Fall of Rome. The Pandemic verse has never fallen far beyond perfectly fine, but even inventive gameplay additions and twists, with the likes of the real-time dice game Rapid Response being a highlight, can't escape the feeling of the series generally having its cube-shaped cake and eating it. And true, Season 0 does at first seem like yet another spin-off spilling out of Pandemic's already crowded global disease spot onto yet another wildly unexpected and questionably relevant theme, this time 1960s spy thriller. Happily though, Season 0 goes beyond just swapping the lab coat for a trench coat. The Cold War period inspires some refreshing gameplay additions, including the affiliation of cities with the Eastern or Western blocks, making it harder to travel around the divided world using the multiple aliases in your passport. It comes with an actual passport, it's really, really cool. The introduction of teams in place of curing diseases that players can build and send off on various missions, from hunting down agents to discovering Soviet secrets, adds another layer of strategy and feels really immersive to the theme, as well as throwing up some interesting surprises during the Legacy campaign that add more of a feeling of espionage action. The focus on chasing targets, hunting down secrets, and even dipping into Bond-style gadgetry means that Season 0 also nicely sidesteps the grim disease apocalypse of the previous games in the series. While not as refreshingly original as Season 1, or boldly experimental as the unfairly overlooked Season 2. Season 0 is maybe the most dynamic and consistent that Pandemic Legacy has ever been, maybe the Pandemic series as a whole. Despite taking place before the rest of the series, Season 0 weaves in sly nods to future events and plays off on players' investment in the world across multiple games, and comes together in a conclusion that feels immensely satisfying if you've played all the Pandemic Legacy games to this point, or just provides a nice jumping on point if you're completely new. It still works as a prequel. I'm a fan of the series, but even I was surprised how much I cared about a world that started as a load of generic pawns and cubes on a world map. Pandemic Legacy Season 0 isn't the most groundbreaking, innovative or surprising game of this year. What it is the perfect send-off to a series that I've come to love across 3 games and multiple years now. I was invested in the story, surprised by where it went, and by the time everything wrapped up, completely satisfied. Along with Season 1 and 2, it's an experience that I won't forget anytime soon. It's the game of 2024, in more ways than one.
The name Fort has been on every Dicebreaker team member's lips since it was first demoed at PAX East last year, with the video team bringing tidings of its many virtues back with them after their trip. Their numerous compliments were enough to instill a certain amount of hype around the game, which can be dangerous if a release is unable to live up to the players' expectations. Luckily enough, Fort very much lives up to its reputation as being a fantastic deck building game that insists that you lather it with all the love and attention it truly deserves. On its surface, Root's charms are very apparent. Designed by Grant Rodiak and published by Later Games, the art style, created by the immensely talented Kyle Ferrin, that's the artist behind Root, draws the eye of a collage of bright colours and conveys its themes of childhood whimsy in a way that feels universal. No matter what kind of upbringing you might have had, Fort somehow finds a way of tapping into the player's nostalgia for those times. The world might have seemed just a little less heavy. These feelings continue to be fed by cradling the tokens featured in the games. See these tiny little pizzas and boxes of toys, which feel like they could be used for an entirely imaginary game in and of themselves. It's all unbearably charming, really. The game itself plays in a series of easy-to-follow steps that sees you playing and taking cards in order to gather victory points. How you acquire victory points is entirely down to which cards you have in your hand and how you use them alongside your resources. Those being those pizza and toy box tokens, because we all know that kids operate purely within a barter economy. Some cards allow you to transform resources into victory points, whereas others will give you victory points for just having a certain amount of stuff stored in a certain place. Fort offers players the freedom to choose and change their strategies on the fly, which makes it an incredibly exciting and engaging game to play. You don't get bogged down in piles of cards in Fort. Instead, the game's complexity comes from players' interactions with one another. The yard mechanic forces players to place any cards they haven't used on their turn into a free market of sorts, opening up the opportunity for their opponent to take those cards for themselves. It's such a simple bit of gameplay, but it transforms the entire experience into a deeply interactive one, where players pay attention to what their opponents are doing and shape their decisions around that. This is ultimately what makes Fort worthy of being my Game of the Year. Beyond the beautiful artwork, adorable tokens and excellent pacing, Fort is a game that welcomes new players in with open arms and forces them to develop a relationship with one another. A little bit like the bossy friend who refuses to let anyone spend a lunch break on their own, which is the kind of friend that we all need at some point in our lives.
So The Crew Quest for Planet 9 was the very first game we played while attending PAX Unplugged all the way back in 2019, and as far as I was concerned, we could have just packed it up and gone home then. Good job everyone, Great trip. We've done it. The Crew basically is a cooperative trick-taking game for 3 or more players. You deal out a deck of 4 coloured suits, numbers 1 to 9, and then 1 special suit of trump cards which have a rocket on them, and they're numbered 1 to 4. Players then have a look at their cards to see what they've got in their hands, and they take it in turn to claim objective cards. Objective cards are basically miniature versions of the actual cards in the main deck, and in taking one, the player effectively says they're going to win the trick in which that card is played. So, for example, if I took the objective card with the pink 7, it would be my job to make sure that when the 7 pink card is played, I'm winning that trick, and thereby complete my objective. The mission is complete when all of the objective cards have been fulfilled and flipped over, and there are 50 missions in all, each with varying objectives and special conditions, as you, a team of plucky explorers, try and find the mystical 9th planet beyond the reaches of Pluto. Sorry, you're not a planet anymore, Pluto. Now, so far you might think the Crew Quest for Planet 9 is so straightforward as to be pointless. You just have to play cards in order. That's easy. But the thing is, during a mission in the Crew, you aren't allowed to talk. At all. You also have to be really careful not to give away too much with your facial expressions, your body language, or any gestures, because during a mission in the Crew, you get one chance and one chance only to give information to the others. You do this by playing a card face up in front of you and placing your communication token on it. If it goes at the top of the card, it means it is the highest value card of that suit in your hand. If it goes at the bottom, it means it's the lowest value card of that suit in your hand. And if it goes smack bang in the middle, it means it's the only card you have of that suit. Players can use this token to communicate at the start of any trick, and choosing when to reveal information to other players, and obviously what bit of information to reveal to the other players, is vitally important because it could make the difference between success and failure. And this is where the Crew absolutely shines. This is a co-op game in which everyone needs to be watching, waiting, and thinking ahead at all times, because in space, no one can hear you, table captain. The tension that builds as missions get longer and the special parameters get more difficult is absolutely wonderful, and given that this game is really, really easy to teach, that tension and that excitement is truly infectious. So, having played it for just half an hour at PAX, in fact, I pre-ordered it twice because I knew I was going to be telling people a lot about this game, and I wanted to be able to lend a copy to people if they were willing to listen, but at the same time I refused to be apart from it. I actually ended up giving a copy away to somebody who couldn't get it in their home country yet, and so I ended up buying it for a third time because, quite frankly, a trick-taking game has no business being this good, and should we ever meet, I will happily tell you more about it. Just don't ask to borrow my copy because I will end up bankrupt.
Hello, it's Lolies from the video team, and my game of the year 2020 is Cosmic Frog! Cosmic Frog is a game by Devious Weasel for 2 to 6 players and about an hour's worth of playtime that casts you in the role of giant frogs in space. Now, you're not playing as actual frogs, you're playing as frog-like creatures known as Reyna. You're immortal, invulnerable, and about 2 miles tall. You and your friends, opponents, are fighting it out on the celestial planes to gobble up as much terrain as possible, store it in your gullet, jump into the ether so you can regurgitate it into your vault for safekeeping to score points, and all of this in a race against time while the land you're feeding on starts to splinter into literal nothingness. Now, you can play this game in several ways. You can play it nicey nice and keep to yourself and kind of just get on with the task at hand, which is just gobbling up all the lovely land around you. Or you can play it the Lolies way, which is to beat up any and all frogs that get in your way, unload them of any land they're storing in their gullets, Or you can play it more sneakily and raid their vaults while they're distracted and try and get all the land that they've been trying to safekeep. Johnny Wheels and myself discovered this game at PAX East earlier this year and instantly fell in love with it, or at least Johnny and I did. So much so that we had to fight over who got to do this as the game of the year this year. It's not only is the art done in this fantastically garish 70s style, but the theme is a theme of absurdity at its finest. And who couldn't love that? I mean, you're frogs in space fighting over eating land. Have I mentioned that you're 2 miles tall? 2 miles? Whilst the game has a lot going on, the basic mechanics are actually quite simple, so you'll get playing in no time, which is always a plus in my circles. And if you've ever played Cosmic Encounter, a game that's from the actual 70s, you'll recognize that Cosmic Frog is definitely a nod towards this, sharing similar mechanics, the era, and I mean even the name itself is quite similar. When we did it today, we played on this game earlier this year, I spoke about how I felt this game was specifically made for one Alex Lolies. That's me. And I still believe this, no matter what devious weasels say to the contrary.
When we played Cosmic Frog, I felt very much like there was like a group of people, or maybe like one individual. I don't know how many people came up with this game, but whoever came up with this game sat down and was like, what could I make for Alex Lolies?
It is a take that style game, and I'm a take that style player. Even if the game that I'm playing doesn't lend itself to take that style gaming. There are so many fantastic contenders for Game of the Year this year, but this just ticked so many boxes for me. I mean, come on. Look at the miniatures you're playing with. It's a giant frog! Reina. It's a giant Reina. I can't wait to show this off to my friends when we can finally play IRL again. And it is available on TTS to play. That's Tabletop Simulator, if you don't know. Go check it out. It's really, really good. This is my game of the year.